Wednesday evening, everyone. You are watching DirectLine, and we are joined by Delegate Rachel Muñoz from Arundel County. Welcome to the show, and our hosts tonight are Mark Unkefer and Jackie Saxton. Take it away, guys.
Thank you, Dwight. Thank you for that boost of adrenaline I always need to start the show. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us. You know, as we get closer and closer to the new year, everyone is starting to think towards session and getting back in the fight. And, you know, it's always an uphill battle, and we very much appreciate what you guys are doing in Annapolis for us.
And we really appreciate having you back. You really provided a lot of insights when we did the show after session. So it's good to be able to get ready for the next one.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you guys so much for having me. I was actually at a luncheon for Senator Ed Riley's road dedication today, and Delegate Schmidt is sitting next to me, and he goes, "We're 75 days out from session." And I'm like trying to politely eat my meal. I'm like, why would you tell me that? Why would you like share that kind of information?
Like, I'm trying to eat my sandwich.
I was just trying to enjoy my lunch.
So as you guys have started having delegation meetings, what have been like the hot topics coming up? What are your key issues going into 2024?
Yeah, so we've already had a couple of meetings just in Judiciary Committee, and we are talking a lot about the juvenile justice reform that happened a few years ago, and people are not happy with the results of it. You know, we hear more and more about juvenile crime happening across the state, and we had like a 5-hour hearing on an afternoon, which was virtual, and we ended up grilling the secretary of the Department of Juvenile Services for 2 hours alone to get him to explain to us why juveniles are committing crimes. And then there's a revolving door, and they're not accepting them, and they're putting them right back on the street to literally, in some cases, commit the exact same crime that day. And so it's been an uphill battle, but I do feel like with the outcry we have across Maryland, the Democrats are starting to pay attention. So I'm hoping we can make some positive changes on that front next session.
And that's very interesting, because I recall I was having a conversation with, I believe it was Delegate Griffith, who was talking about how we as Republicans in a state as blue as Maryland win on the back end. We end up winning in the end because the Democrats push through these bills, and then a couple of years later, they realize that everything you guys said was correct, and then they roll them back.
It's so hard, isn't it? Because we always talk about unintended consequences. And, you know, as an attorney, like, I read a bill on the floor that says, you know, no child who has been bullied because of their sex, gender, real or perceived, you know, sexual orientation or sexual identity can have the school tell the parents they're being bullied unless the child is given permission to the administration. And I read that and I think, well, that's terrible. We don't actually want this.
Right.
And then the floor leader's like, oh, no, but the bill's for this. And I'm like, 1 in 7 children in a population of 0.1%. This is who we're protecting. But I'm like, that's not what your bill says.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like so many times they're like, we have this great idea. We're going to fix Maryland. We're going to make it great. But then when you actually read, you know, the bill and what they're going to do, you're like, no, please don't do this. This is not going to do what you think it's going to do, or it's going to have incredibly horrible unintended consequences for other Marylanders that you're not even intending to affect. And sometimes, like, we stop it on the floor on second reader or something, like in that case I was just talking about. But in some cases, like this juvenile justice reform, we couldn't stop it. They did it. And now people have died. You know, there are children who may have not become career criminals, but because of the system we put in place, they've committed dozens of crimes at this point before they're even 18 years of age. And now we have to say, oh, let's maybe go back and look at that again and fix it. And it's a sorry way to kind of run a state.
So what are the proposals you expect to be considering on juvenile justice?
Well, one of them is definitely the age difference. So currently under the age, I believe it's 13, you can't prosecute a child for any crime whatsoever. So in my county in Anne Arundel, we had a child under the age of, I want to say the child was like 10, maybe a 10-year-old. Do you remember this? They went into school with a handgun in their backpack. And literally the school couldn't do anything. The police couldn't do anything. No one could do anything because of the way they changed this law. And so these children are not getting held accountable, which means they're not being taught lessons, right? And so definitely changing that age of responsibility where the legal system can kind of be called in to help these children who maybe don't have the help at home. That's definitely something on the table. Another big issue that I've heard from a lot of police in my area is the issue with police not being able to interrogate, question in any way, shape, or form juveniles before they've spoken with an attorney or a parent or something like this. And even the parent is unable to waive that in the way they created it in the law. And it's just causing so many problems. And I think police have said that's one of their number one concerns and the number one issue why they're not able to close cases, because they're not able to ask questions. And so that's another big area.
So that's interesting. So the parent can't even waive that?
No, it's crazy. It's so crazy. There's so many double standards, I find. Going into my third session, it's like, a 5-year-old knows who they are. So we should believe them when they tell us who they are. I hear this on one bill. And then on another bill, I hear, well, the brain isn't fully formed until they're 25 years of age. So we can't really, charge them with a felony. It's like,
right. They could pick their pronouns and get sex changes, but they can't commit crimes.
And I come from a world where there are objective truths and falsehoods, and they can't both be true. And so those are kind of the issues I think we're really going to grapple with. My gut feeling is this session is going to be a lot about these social issues, especially pertaining to children.
So to continue on in that thread, one of the big issues I know that you're championing coming into this session, along with some of the other delegates on the Republican side, is protecting women's sports and protecting our girls in their locker room. So can you talk a little bit about that initiative?
Yes, I mean, this is something Delegate Kathy Shalega, she's been the tip of the spear for years on this issue, and she has taken the brunt of, the hits socially about it. But this is just a no-brainer, isn't it? Anyone who is a woman or has a child who's female is like, absolutely not. This should never be happening. And I now have 3 daughters. So I absolutely, and my oldest daughter is only 9 now. So thank God. I'm hoping, like you were saying before, I'm hoping we kind of go full circle and figure out this is horrible before my daughter gets old enough to be beaten by, an enormous boy, or I'm going to have to find a situation where she never goes into a locker room, and I'm going to have to take her, get her changed, somewhere else in a safe setting, and then take her to her sports and activities, because it's just unbelievable.
So one of the other bills that you were involved with last year, it had some ups and downs, was the basically TikTok on government computers. Is that another one that you expect to come back next year?
That was such an interesting bill. So I know we talked about it before. It passed the House unanimously, and that was quite a compliment, I think, to me and the work of the House HGO, the Health and Government Operations. They were so kind. And everyone was supportive. And so I had this big win. I'm like, oh, I passed the House unanimously. This is a no-brainer bill, obviously. And then they killed it in the Senate. And I was like, what is happening? But I mean, it seems like a no-brainer. And so it's definitely something we're going to have to discuss, because again, in this day and age, China just ran into a Philippine ship a couple of days ago and just ran into it. They were like, you can't be here. And so they're putting people's lives in danger, out in their waters. And, they're sitting here backing Iran with everything we're dealing with now. And so again, I will ask my colleagues, are you sure you want to allow companies that, have a legal requirement to turn over all the data they collect, which is extensive? My expert read all 50 pages of TikTok's, disclosures about the information they collect, which is every typing that you put in a keypad that has this, app on it. do you really want that to be handed over to the Chinese government, especially the wars that we have going across the world right now? Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me, but so much in Annapolis doesn't. So I'll keep trying.
So, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and it was probably worth saying, that this didn't ban TikTok everywhere. That may be a separate conversation, but at least in Maryland, what it would have done, it would have kept TikTok, your bill would have kept TikTok off of government computers. Exactly. And it's sort of hard to see, even in, you can argue some of the small points, why you would want to have TikTok on a Maryland state computer.
It's fascinating, isn't it? And for me, I talked about, when I presented the bill, I'm a daughter of 2 military veterans, U.S. Army veterans. And, my father was involved in DOD work, after he retired from the Army. And so that type of cybersecurity is something that's just sort of on my mind. It's something I think about. And so the devices I'm using now, I have my phone here, none of this has the work that I do as a delegate. But I have back here my actual delegate laptop, which has all of the testimony from every single person who comes, all of the bills in my committee. It has, sensitive information on it. Mm-hmm. Why do I need to have TikTok on there? We can have it on our phones. We can have it on our personal devices. But actually what ended up happening was my bill got through the House, and then TikTok hired a local Annapolis lobbying firm to lobby against my bill in the Senate. And so it's like our own people killed it. And I'm like, okay.
So one of the things that's happening internationally that is having local impacts is what's going on in the Middle East right now. So I know I personally have felt a lot less safe in my community. Our representative delegate, who's a Democrat, Joe Vogel, had swastikas spray painted on his apartment a couple weeks ago. Okay. So it is definitely hitting close to home. There's been a lot of increased police presence in Montgomery County. Mm-hmm. Do you think that there will be impact going into session? Are there going to be bills about anti-Semitism? Or are there going to be more actions taken? Or the Democrats, we're kind of seeing a little bit going on at the national level, going to side more with the Palestinian side?
I really don't see that happening here in Maryland, to be honest with you. I could be naive, but I would pray to God that the good people in our Maryland General Assembly would never side with terrorists, obviously, first of all, or sympathize with them. And we have such a vibrant Jewish community here in Maryland. We are, one of the first in the whole country here in Baltimore. And I have a number of friends, in my private life, in the legislature, who are Jewish, who are Orthodox Jew. And I've partnered with some of them actually on some hate crime bills, which sometimes my Republican colleagues were not a fan of. But I would so often say to them, we're next. I'm a Catholic, I'm not Jewish, but I'm the people who believe things that the mainstream does not like, we are next. And so we need to, protect each other, and we need to be aware that, this hatred and this violence is happening in our communities. I don't think it's a majority of Marylanders, and I don't think a majority of people in the Maryland legislature would support that. And so I could definitely see some resolutions coming down, some support for, our Jewish community. I could definitely see that. I mean, Dana Stein is set to be the next Speaker pro tem, according to the Speaker. And so he's of Jewish descent. And so I think that overall, the Maryland General Assembly, that's one thing I think we get pretty right, that we stand with all of our, neighbors across Maryland, and especially our Jewish community at this time. I don't see that being an area of controversy, but if it is, just know I'll be heartbroken and, fighting it every step of the way. But I'm hoping that's one issue we can really all come together on.
And sticking on the same vein and the same topic, there's an article that came out that nationally, with all this going on, there's been a huge spike in Jewish people purchasing guns to protect themselves. And obviously, SB 1 was a huge issue last session. Mm-hmm. Do you see there being any conversation about, the right to defend yourself, the concealed carries? Obviously, I know that there are still ongoing legal issues there. Mm-hmm. And, as people feel a little bit less safe in their homes. And I know that Maryland has a lot of really wonky gun laws that like you have a duty to flee. And even if someone trespasses on your property, you're not allowed to defend yourself with a gun. Like, do you see any of that coming into play?
Definitely. I mean, it's an ongoing conversation. I know there's 2 cases currently ongoing, and we're doing pretty well, I think, on both of them because it's a constitutional issue at heart, right? But like I got so many amendments in on those 2 gun bills that came through, just odd ones, like in the middle of committee, we're voting, and I'm like constantly trying to think of, avenues that I can use. And one of them was in committee during the vote. I thought, my father joined the U.S. Army at the age of 17. Under this bill, he wouldn't be allowed to carry a firearm, but he can go die in another country, protecting us. So that made no sense. And so it was like stuff like that I presented during the vote in committee, and our chairman was kind enough to actually just incorporate it immediately into the bill, and he took stuff on the fly. And so we got, the compromises that we could get through at the time. But like you're talking about, one of the issues I really had was with domestic violence survivors, because I work with them on some legislation, and I try to help them with the legal system because it is not set up in many ways to protect them. And there's a lot of loopholes. And it can be very dangerous. It's life or death when you're dealing with that, just like what you're talking about. And so people who are vulnerable right now are definitely in need of protection. And I was actually listening to something earlier. So I've been running around, to different meetings and things, but I was listening to something, and it's interesting what you say about Joe, because I actually didn't know that. So I'm going to send him a message after this, because that's horrifying. Mm-hmm. He's a wonderful human being. He has a really good heart. He came in as a freshman, we went on the freshman tour together. We got really close. He's a wonderful human. And I mean, there was a time in this country where race and interracial marriage and children was like a thing of controversy, even during my lifetime. And being in an interracial marriage, like having someone spray paint something on my garage, on my family garage, is like a concern I've had in my life. And so I wouldn't wish that on anyone, even my worst enemy. And so that's horrific. But I was listening to something, and it was talking about how they found that the support for, Israel actually has a generational gap. So it was something like the boomers, like the greatest generation, the boomers were like 96% supportive of Israel. And then, the next generation was like 80 something. And then our generation was more, but like the newest, like the Gen Z, it was like 50 something percent supportive and 40 something percent supportive of like Hamas and stuff. And I was absolutely floored. And Joe talks a lot about how he's, one of the first Gen Z people in the Maryland General Assembly. And so I think that is a population that he, is a great example to, that is not American.
Right. And the evidence of what you're saying with that generation gap is playing out on college campuses all over right now.
It's horrific, isn't it? I hear people talking about not sending their children to college because no colleges are safe. If you can have people actively spewing hate in, the public courtyards of our universities, at the most prestigious universities in our country, in the world, like, where's your children safe?
Right. I mean, Mark Dwight and I are LGW alum, and we were talking right before the show about how they were projecting, and it wasn't the school, it was students were projecting onto the library, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which is basically a call for Jewish genocide and other phrases like that. And it's terrifying. Yeah.
It is. It really is. So I know for sure that we will have some resolutions come forward, and we will try to do some things to be supportive once we get back into session. And my hope beyond hope is that the whole General Assembly will be able to rally together and be supportive of that.
That would be really great. We're talking about gun legislation, and you were involved in another piece of gun legislation, and it's another one of those, how shall I say, paradoxes or contradictions. That on one hand, there's all this legislation focused on prohibiting guns, but you were involved with legislation on gun theft, which would make it a felony to steal a gun, which is, you would think, would be would make a lot of sense. But of course, we've been fighting for that for a number of years. You want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I thought it was just a no-brainer. Obviously, we're talking about theft, and we're talking about a weapon that kills people. And according to the majority of our General Assembly, these objects kill people, the objects themselves. So if anyone were committing a crime to steal one, that's probably a crime that's worth, the level of felony. But I said in my testimony, this is not my bill. This is not the first time this bill has come before you. This is not the second. This is not the third, and it is not the fourth. This bill has come before the General Assembly for years before my time. And the fact that we haven't passed it is just, I think it's just very telling. Like, what are we here for? On the one hand, we say, guns are the problem. And on the other hand, we say, well, people who steal them, that's okay. We don't want to actually call that a felony. I mean, you can't, and I mean, that's the problem with, I think, the criminal justice system here in Maryland, is you can't have it both ways. We either need to be tough on crime and tough on criminals and hold people accountable for the actions that they commit and reduce crime here in Maryland, or we need to let everyone go, create a positive reinforcement system for people committing these crimes, and then we just see crime continue to spiral. And I will just keep fighting for that. That bill is definitely coming back. It's definitely on my list. I'll just put it in forever until it passes. But you can't have it both ways. We have to either be tough on crime and tough on criminals, hold people accountable. I mean, anyone who's been a parent knows that if you let your kids get away with stuff, they're going to get away with it. If you're married and you let your spouse get away with stuff, they're going to get away with it. But if you hold people accountable and you have certain standards of civility, and you say, if you want to be part of this society, these are the standards that you need to meet, and they include not stealing weapons to murder people or intimidate them or commit other crimes with, that's how you create a society that's safe. And, my sister used to work with the Maryland Department of Social Services. God bless her. And she was telling me, a former colleague was telling her that they're giving people bus passes in Baltimore City for free. They're like, take a bus pass, go. Anywhere you want, just go. Why do you think they're doing that? Because they've allowed the crime and the education system to get to such a level that people just don't want to be there anymore. And it's not safe. And people aren't having a good life, and they're not getting a good education. Republicans have not been in charge of Baltimore City. Like, that is not our fault. And I think it's time, when we see these things like you were discussing across the globe, I think it's time that we actually hold our people accountable. We clean up our house, we get it in order, because things are not going to get easier. They're only going to get harder.
So shifting towards education, which you brought up briefly, obviously we've thrown a lot of money at kwon, which has made it very expensive for basically every county to pay for. I don't think any of them can really afford it. Mm-hmm. And yet we're seeing this report that no Baltimore students passed their math exams. And that's with a $1.6 billion budget. So do you think that the Democrats are going to try and walk back some of this education legislation, or do you think it's just going to get worse?
I honestly don't think they can at this point, because the teachers union is so committed to this. And they also don't think it's a short-term solution. They think we pour this money in and we continue to do so, and eventually everything's going to be okay, because money solves all problems. Right. But obviously anyone who's lived here for over 20 years knows we've done this before and it didn't work last time. And that's not what's going to solve the problem this time.
And arguably there's even less accountability attached to kwon than there was with the plan that was 20 years ago, Thornton, where there was supposedly accountability, and then they kind of walked that back when basically was the Baltimore City schools were called into question and not performing. So that's kind of disheartening.
Yeah, I mean, it's terrifying. I think accountability should be a baseline when you consider how much every Marylander pays in taxes. I think our government owes it to us to be accountable. If we say we're taking this money to provide X, we should get X. And if we don't get it, we should get our money back. We should be able to take that money and put it somewhere where we can get the outcome that we were promised.
So, sticking on money, Wes Moore said over the summer at Mako, tighten your belts. It's going to get expensive. We've already blown through whatever money was surplus was left over from Larry Hogan's administration. So are you expecting some tough budget conversations going into session?
Absolutely. It is going to be so uncomfortable for all of the legislators who are used to asking for very large sums of money for very unimportant initiatives, because it's not there anymore. And they're
present company accepted, right?
Well, I said the ones who are used to asking for a lot of money. I don't ask for a lot of money. I'm like, I put in a bill last session to cut the sales tax in Maryland by 1% because I'm new and I thought this makes sense. My husband was actually born in Baltimore City and grew up here, and he remembers when sales tax was 5%. I don't remember, but he remembers. And we talk about it, and we're like, it's 6%. And then in Anne Arundel County, our county taxes have like skyrocketed. Mm-hmm. I had to do a whole piece on this. I mean, people got their property tax bills this year. And I'm getting phone calls. People are stopping me when I'm walking my dog, when I'm walking my children to school. Like, people are like, what is happening? Because we're in the middle of, a recovery from a pandemic where they shut us all down and people weren't able to work. And then we're dealing with inflation. And now we're pounding on these like incredibly high taxes, right? And so it's like, so that was my rookie, for the good of, the conservative cause. Like, why is sales tax 6%? What are you using it for that's actually benefiting us? And I will not say I'm not the kind of Republican who's like, taxes should be zero. I'll be honest with you. My 11-year-old son is 100% there. He is like, why does the government need these taxes from me? I will keep my money. I will take care of myself. And I'm like, okay, what about roads, buddy? And the police officers and the firefighters. He's like, we can work that out. We can work that out without the government being involved. And I'm not even there, to be honest with you. But like every tax, we had the digital tax. Like, it's just, they're like, what else can we tax? What can we find? Air. Let's start taxing air.
We tax grain. Why not air?
We can just tax everything. And that's what people are feeling. And I think that's what Marylanders are feeling. And we're like so blessed to live in such a prosperous, comfortable state for most of the state, right? You guys are in Montgomery County. I'm in Anne Arundel County. I think our counties are pretty nice, by and large. But yeah, I put in a bill to reduce the Maryland sales tax 1%. And, I joked in my presentation that that bill was actually my son's idea. He brought it to me when he was 10. He's like, why don't we just make it 5? Because we take him to the store and we like do it. He's like 6%. Like, why can't it just be like an even, easy number that I can do that? And so one of the delegates, I forget his name now. He was like, let me tell you what your son can do. He can, do the 5% sales tax and then calculate the 1% sales and then add it together. And I was like, that's not really the point here, but thank you. Thank you for that math lesson on how 10-year-olds can pay a 6% sales tax on their toys at the toy store.
Well, forgive me if he was going to the Baltimore City schools, that kind of math. Well, anyway, we won't go down that particular road. But you actually have another cost of, I would argue, a cost of living piece of bill, which is the effort to disengage Maryland from having to follow the California air quality rules. And this is one of those really wonky, hard to follow, hard to understand bills. But essentially what it requires is that Maryland will follow the rules that California has on air quality. A, and B, that could mean getting rid of gas cars. So why don't you explain a little bit about how that's working out?
I mean, I remember that floor speech because it's the first and only time I've ever said in my life, as a proud Republican, I'm asking you to please Let us be like California. Let us be like New York, because Maryland's actually trying to surpass what these super left states are doing in so many capacities. And I mean, I was at a tour of a Cardinal Health facility in my district last week, and an aide of another delegate was there. And we came out, and she had recently damaged her vehicle. And I was teaching her about touch-up paint because she couldn't, afford to fix it. And I'm like, oh, you can buy this touch-up paint. It's like $30. It'll look way prettier. And we were talking about it, and I'm like, then you can save the money and for your next car and stuff. She's like, yeah, I'm really worried because when I have to buy an electric vehicle, I don't know how I'm going to be able to afford it.
Right.
And it's like, that's the issue. Again, we're dealing with inflation. They want to take away the gas burning stoves. My mother-in-law is a legal immigrant from Asia. If you try to take this woman's gas burning stove, it's not going to be okay. I'm just thinking of all the Asian mothers across the state of Maryland who are going to be like, are you crazy? How would you ever
use a wok on an electric stove?
How would you cook on anything, except, and even in our home, when we were looking for houses, she's always like, we're like, oh, we kind of like this house. She's like, oh no, that's electric. You don't want that. You don't want that house. It doesn't work as well. And so that's the thing. It's it's just been such a struggle. And I think some of our members are just sort of outliers, and they're like, they want to build this utopia that they kind of subscribe to, which is kind of what California has tried to do and what New York's tried to do. But circling back to your first point, how are those states doing today? Yeah. We don't want to be like California. We do not want to be like New York City right now. I mean, they're not great places to live. People are fleeing from them. And so I think Maryland, we can do better than that. Maryland, I think, is worth fighting for. I think we're blessed to live here. We just have to learn these lessons without trying them out on people first to learn they weren't a good idea.
So do you have any new bills that you're putting in that you're excited about that you want to share with us?
I have a number of bills I'm excited about. I was actually working on one today. I had a meeting today because it's been sort of on my heart since last session. And I ended up connecting with a woman today who is a stage 4 breast cancer survivor. And that apparently doesn't really happen very much. And she runs this nonprofit organization where she takes 25 different families whose, the mother of the family is stage 4 breast cancer and terminal. She takes them, their husbands, and all of their children on this amazing trip where they do 5-star hotel, Disney parks, all these things in Tennessee. It's amazing. And she's so passionate about this. And I was sitting with her and I was talking to her about the fact that in the state of Maryland, we passed a bill that allows men who want to become women, Medicare pays for them to have a breast construction surgery, I guess it's called. Mm-hmm. And it's weighed on my heart ever since last session when we fought this bill, because women who are breast cancer survivors who've had to have a double mastectomy to save their lives, Medicare doesn't pay for their breast reconstruction surgery. And this woman was able to have it because she wasn't on Medicare. But it's one of those things, again, that I find just to be just an unbelievable dichotomy of the state of Maryland. If you're rich, you can have this, but if you're poor, you can't. So that's a bill I'm really passionate about. And again, when it comes to, fighting Boost and school vouchers and school choice and stuff, again, it's if you're rich in Maryland, you can have a phenomenal education. Even in some parts of Montgomery County, we have family that lives in Montgomery County and their children attend public schools, and these kids are getting the education of a lifetime. And then you have children who are poor who can't do basic math and reading. And so that's my big issue. I feel as a Republican, I'm why can't it be fair? Why can't people who are poor have the same, if we're going to give government benefits to someone, shouldn't we give them to people to kind of cancer survivors, children getting education? It's not that hard. And so that's something I'm working on. And there's a bunch of ladies who are going to come down and testify. And talk about what having that surgery means for them and what it's like to live as a woman without a uterus or, without breasts and things like that, and how hard it is. I mean, I was like tearing up during this meeting. It was really hard for me because I've had cancer, but like not breast cancer. So I'm like, it's a struggle, I think, for everyone. And the fact that we live in a state that is so prosperous, like if we're going to pay for men to get breasts, why can't we pay for actual women who are breast cancer survivors to have that reconstruction, to kind of make themselves whole? The fact that we don't do that here is just, I think it's a stain on our state.
Yeah. Well, in our last 10 minutes, you have a birthday fundraiser coming up. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that and how people can get tickets?
Yes. So I hope you guys are coming. I know you got your invites, but I'm really excited. This year is kind of special. I know a lot of politicians have a lot of fundraisers all year. And, when I was getting started, I'm like, okay, I need to have this fundraiser and I need to do this. And usually I have like a spring one after session. And obviously with having cancer, that didn't happen. And I felt so bad about it. I'm like, oh, I'm not doing my job properly. I'm not raising money to fight for, my community. And it kind of weighed on me. But then, as time went on, I thought, I'll just do one big fundraiser once a year and we'll go all out and we will have a great time regardless of how much we raise. And I reached out to Governor Bob Ehrlich and his wife, his former First Lady, Kendall Ehrlich, and they were kind enough to come and be our special guests and really pour some of that wisdom on us, kind of in the realm of the social issues we've kind of been touching on tonight. And so having a lot to do with our children, especially. And so I'm just so excited. I can't wait. I think it's going to be a ton of fun, really good food. We're going to kind of have that one big blowout. And, as we've kind of been planning it, in the past, I would be like, okay, I got to plan my fundraiser. And it's kind of, it's like another job. It's like another thing on the to-do list. But this year it's really special because, the cancer that I had, I was told by the doctors that basically it's like, it can go from nothing to dead in like 6 weeks. And so they found it on accident, told me, scheduled my surgery a week out without even telling me. They're like, this is when your surgery is scheduled. I was like, okay, sounds good. And so that was in April. So now we're coming into November and I'm here and I get to have my 38th birthday and I just feel super blessed. So I'm really excited. It's going to be a really fun night and I hope you guys are going to be able to come. And, I'm really excited for like the inspiration of these people, who have been there and fought the good fight. I attended the governor's, the salute to the governor that the Maryland party threw. And I was just so struck by the fact that one of the beautiful things about the Republican Party is we have a memory. We remember everyone who came before us. Like we remember Governor Bob Ehrlich. We remember, Reagan. We remember Abraham Lincoln. We remember George Washington. Like we remember our history and then we pass it down to future generations. And I realized that night that I think that's something that the other party doesn't really do because they're never looking back. They're only looking forward at like, what, new gender can we create? What new, law can we create to penalize people for using the wrong pronouns? Like they're always looking in a different direction. But I think one of the beauties of the Republican Party is we know our history. We know why we were founded, how we were founded. And we are so good at passing on that torch to the next generation to continue the good fight. And so that's what I'm really excited about that night. I'm excited for them to pour their wisdom on us and really sort of inspire and give us the tools to kind of continue to push forward as hard as it is sometimes here.
And so that is on November 9th, which is a Thursday night, right? Mm-hmm. At 6:00. Where can people go and get tickets?
So there's a website online. I don't even know. I have like an actual website, like voterachelmuñoz.com. You can find it on there. It's at Chartwell Country Club. It should be a ton of fun. So usually I just say, just Google me. You'll find it.
I do have to sneak in one more question about one of your bills, because if I don't ask about it, our producer, Dwight Patel, might not ask me back on the show and substitute me. I don't know who else. But this is his favorite bill, which is, I think you know which one it is. It's the move or get out of the way bill. So and basically, well, you can describe what it is.
Okay, so the Move Get Out the Way bill, which I named, was actually requested by my very favorite constituent, who is my husband. And my husband, like every good husband and father here in Maryland, is driving to work every day, stuck in traffic, and people are in his way. And he's like, we're driving one day, and he's like, can people just get out of the way? Like, they're not even driving the speed limit. They're driving under the speed limit in the left lane. They're in my way, and I need to get where I'm going. And I was like, ooh, I could do something about that. And so we named it after the Ludacris song. I omitted the curse word that's technically in that song, but we named it Move, Get Out the Way. And we thought it was a no-brainer. Like, if you are in the left lane, if there's a multi-lane road and you are in the left lane going slower than the speed of traffic, you should probably move over and be polite and let people get where they're going, because you don't know if they're having a medical emergency, if they are late to pick up their child from school, if, they're on their way to a job interview and they don't want to be late for this. Like, we don't know what people are doing. And so I think it's a quite entitled mentality to say, I'm going to drive in the left lane and I'm going to drive as slow as I want, and everyone can wait for me. And so I shared this bill with, the Environment and Transportation Committee. And I said, hey, this is a green bill. Because especially in areas like you guys in Montgomery County, which we used to drive through all the time in college and graduate school, there's so much traffic. And I said, when you have people stuck in traffic, their cars are running. This is polluting the environment. If people can just move over and other people can get to where they're going, it's more environmentally friendly. And so the Democrats in the Environment and Transportation Committee decided to vote my bill out unfavorably because
they can.
Efficient traffic flow is not on their priority list. So, yeah, I was pretty sad about that. I loved that bill. It was a good bill.
Well, hopefully we'll see it make a return, right?
Yeah, speaking for Dwight, I know we're hoping you reintroduce that.
Okay. Dwight gives a mean speech. I think we'll have Dwight come and testify for it. I think that'll sway him.
Maybe that's what I need. I need more people to show up
to the top. Yes.
And talk about why people being inconsiderate need to move and get out of their way. Yes. That's what we need. Okay, it's done. So, it's on the list.
One last plug before we wrap up. November 2nd, we have our pizza first Thursday, 1 week before Delegate Muñoz's event. And it is in support of Israel, and all of the proceeds will be going to the Zionist Organization of America. And we have somebody who will be matching all the proceeds that we make that night. So come out and support Israel and eat some pizza. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you there. So I think that might be it, right, Mark?
I think so, but great show, and we really look forward to hearing back from you during session. It's always been great having you on the show.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Delegate. Thank you all. We'll be back next week with another episode.